So, Stephen, welcome to the Vantage Point Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today. First of all, how are you?
Thank you very much, mate. Fine, thank you. Growing up in rainy Manchester, mid-August.
I suppose one way to keep out of the rain is doing what you do. You run a very popular Brazilian Jiu Jitsu club and a submissions club, right?
Yeah,
Would you say that BJJ or Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is the best form of self-defense?
I do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu because I believe it's the best self-defense. I have my kids doing it. I have my kids doing boxing as well and things like that. But people sometimes confuse fighting and self-defense. They'll say, oh, well, the UFC heavyweight champion doesn't do any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm like, yeah, no, I didn't say it makes the best fighters. That's down to athleticism, strength, a lot of other things. They'll do bits of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well, don't get me wrong. But self-defense then is if somebody's going to attack me and they absolutely can't get away. So I'm not like meeting them for a fight. When I do this and we're having a fight, but I want to get away and I can't. The only time when I can't get away is if somebody grabs me. If somebody grabs me, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is what's going to get me out of it. I'm a 6'3", 17 and a half stone lad. But if I was a 10-stone woman and a 15-stone guy grabbed hold of me, even if you boxed a little or whatever, what's the chances that you're going to, KO a 15-stone man when you're 10 stone? Probably not, unless you're like a champion boxer. But if you give that woman like a year's worth of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, she'd get away. My money would be on the woman anyway to be able to at least defend herself. I'm not saying she'd beat him up, but she'd be able to defend herself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, of course, man. That's a great answer. I think you hit the nail on the head there. The real benefit is when you're showing people who are smaller, who, if you're watching MMA, everyone's competing in their own weight category, right? So you see an even match all the time. But in terms of self-defense, a lot of the time you're not going to be the biggest person there, and it's about manipulating the weight of the person who is maybe attacking you without incurring a criminal charge yourself, because you don't want to be the one who's struck someone down and then it be on you then.
A UFC fighter, Frank Mir, who's like who's a heavyweight champion as well, fought Brock Lesnar. He done an interview not long ago. And actually, he said this to me and they said it again on an interview. Literally, he works as a bouncer in Vegas, which you can imagine would probably be mental. He said, I could have had 200 fights a night if I wanted to. And he's a big guy as well. He said, but you don't want to punch people, especially in the drunk. He said, I'd literally just point past them, they'd turn around, I'd just choke them out and just put them down. They'd wake up 5-10 seconds later wondering what's going on. They'd walk off and go, you all right, mate? And then that was that. So I must have done that to 2,000 people. And I'm like, imagine he punched 2,000 people. A man of his size, probably 1,000 of them would be dead. No matter who you are, you don't want to get into a fist fight, really. You don't want, he's doing his job as a doorman. So they don't want to go in for a fist fight every night with whoever, could be anybody, or someone carrying a weapon. The simplest way was I'd literally just spin them around. It'd take me 5 seconds to choke them out and it'd be over. I'll go back to work. So again, that's even a scenario where a huge guy is using it. Does that make sense? I'm throwing punches.
What you touched on earlier, people think, oh, I wouldn't want to send my kid to a martial arts gym because it's violent and they might get hurt. Whereas I think what you're arguing is the opposite, that actually knowing the skills might be a way to avoid violence altogether.
I think martial art, it brings out a confidence in kids, which like my daughter, like I had to drag her here for a few months. Like she was coming whether she likes it or not in a way of not in a way I wanted to be a fighter, but she's my daughter. I want to be able to protect herself. We've got to practice what I preach. I can't say, oh, you don't want to do it, no worries. I was like, listen, this is like brushing your teeth and going to school. You're going to do this and you're going to earn your freedom. You want to turn around to when you're 13, 12, you want to go and play out or go wherever your friends. I want to know that you can at least protect yourself in some way, maybe not against a man, but, against someone else who might pick on you or whatever. But now her confidence is just, she comes, goes, I love that I can beat up the boys, and Dad, make sure you put me with some lads and stuff like that. And like, it's kind of just nice to see how she was. She used to be terrified of this environment, and really go into herself, to now kind of walks in a little bit like she owns a room, which is just, as a dad of a daughter, it's good to see. I want her to be confident. I want her to be, it just bleeds over to other things. She expresses herself a lot more now. I know in class and stuff like that, she's not, quiet and timid. She's quiet, but she's not timid. So it bleeds over into other aspects of her life as well, which is what I want for her.
Yeah, I think the confidence you must gain from knowing the skills, especially the skills when you walk in a room of people and you know that you're so much safer, because if any of them tried anything, you'd probably know what to do. Whereas, you know, for a lot of people, if you have no idea what to do, you're not strong, you don't train, you must always feel a little bit paranoid, like something could go wrong at any point here, you know? Any one of these people in this room could take advantage of me in some way. And that must be a real confidence drainer, especially to a lesser extent at school, you know, because bullying does happen. And I remember I used to do Kung Fu back in the day, and they taught me how to do an arm lock, right? Which is a pretty simple self-defense technique. But I remember my friend was getting bullied in the first year of my high school. I was walking to class with my friend who was getting bullied, and the bullies came over and said, "Oh, look, this guy's got a friend," and they tried to get me. And I just took his arm and put him straight in an arm lock. And that was it. It just, nothing else happened because he looked silly then.
You didn't get
and then it didn't happen again. Yeah. And that felt great. And it gave me a lot of confidence. I think it gave him a lot of confidence as well. You know, to be like, well, you know, these people aren't actually that scary.
It teaches you you know, how to defend yourself, but also that you're not made of glass. I'm honestly, I'll say this for me personally, which sounds a bit stupid, to be fair. Coming back to the comment what you just said a little bit about confidence, I am confident, but I am not as confident now, 15 years into grappling, as what I was before I knew anything. I genuinely had an idea in my head of what I was capable of, like most men do. And this is why it's such a healthy thing to go and get your ass kicked and realise that the vision that you've got of yourself, it isn't true. You know, I used to be, I wasn't saying like I was like an asshole or a bully or anything, but I just kind of thought I could take care of myself. And this is with no training. This just with being quite a big lad, thinking I can look after myself. And then when I went to a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu academy and they had like a 50-year-old guy who'd been training 6 months, strangling the life out of me, I was like, wow. I instantly became a little bit more of a shello that I need to learn this. I thought, wow, I thought I could protect myself. Again, I can walk into some rooms, you know, some mats, some gyms I can go and I'm like, yeah, I'm the guy, but I'll go on to others and I'm like, wow, I'm right at the bottom of the trough here. You know, it's good for your ego. It's good for men to really realise, like I said, you're not made of glass, but also you've got a very distorted version of yourself, I think, especially young men. Like I was a 19-year-old, you know, I think I was 20 when I started. So I wish I would have had some martial arts training a little bit earlier. I think would have got my ego in check. And, you know, in teenage years wouldn't have been as, not kind of rough, but I think I'd have just been a better person for it. You know, you've got a bit of an edge on you when you think that you've got something to prove or you think something about yourself, whereas when that kind of goes, it generally goes naturally as you get older anyway. And you're okay, you know, your ego doesn't get you into situations as much. But I think for a child, if you do this from an early age, you'll lose that in your teenage years. You know you're not going to prove anything. You know you're not the toughest guy. You know you're not the weakest guy. You know I can handle myself. There'd be a lot less fights if everybody trained Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or MMA or boxing or Thai, put it that way.
No matter how hard you are or how good you are, you're only as good as the room of people you're in. If you're getting too good for that room of people, maybe it's time to go and find a new room of people where now you're bottom of the class and then you can learn more from those people.
Exactly. I've done a few kind of camps with like lads who have like big fights coming up in the UFC or whatever, and I've been, you know, part of that camp. And then obviously I'm not a professional fighter, I'm not a professional athlete, I'm a jiu-jitsu instructor and I can hold my own to a certain level. But then you get in these rooms and you're like real athletes and real fighters, you're like, wow, I'm right at the bottom here. It's just, well, that's the way it is. But like I said, it's good for you.
I think more people are getting into like wrestling and sort of learning the art of submitting people. And they seem to care a bit more about watching it now. Like I think the casual MMA fan are seeing the likes of maybe an Oliveira, Khabib, even John Jones, these kind of people. And they're seeing the art of being able to get in the right position on the floor and all this kind of thing, rather than just watching like the flashy knockout highlights that you see in the UFC. I would say Khabib is a great example of this. People start to see, wow, this guy is just dominating everywhere. And he makes it look effortless because he's just maneuvering people into the right positions. Do you notice like a surge of people maybe coming to join your kind of gym off the back of some of these guys?
Absolutely. You know, it's the popularity of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is growing for a lot of factors. You know, some celebrities are doing it. I've noticed a massive difference. Like, say, if I'm watching it with friends 10 years ago and they'd all be yawning as soon as it hits the floor, they'd be like, oh, and they just didn't quite understand, I think, the skill set and what was actually happening. So watching something that you don't understand what's happening is quite boring. I can imagine. Even just back then, you'd used to be like, why, you know, the old "why don't you just stand up" or something like that. And you're like, you do not understand what it's like to have a man like Khabib on top of you. It keep you pinned there for a year if you wanted to. You'd never get up. And they're, no, I'm big. But whereas now the conversation is like, I think people have done a little bit, or they're a little bit interested, or they know a little bit more about it, and they can appreciate how good these athletes are that are taking to floor, and like the things what they're actually doing. They're not both just having like some mad scramble to see who gets on top. There's actual real positioning and danger points that they can't put themselves into. That's why he's not putting his hand there, because if he does, it's going to get snapped. More people are starting to watch it from more of an educated view, and it all trickles down to clubs like mine. People wanting to understand what they're looking at.
I used to be a bit of that mindset. I prefer to watch guys like, Conor McGregor knocking out Aldo in 13 seconds or whatever it was, and Ngannou like smashing everyone up. But then you watch guys like, when Stipe fought Ngannou the first time and just wore him out the whole time until he was unable to do anything really. And it was a similar story with Khabib and McGregor, wasn't it? Like they just wear the other guy down. And you see this guy who seems almost invincible 1 minute, suddenly has no energy to do anything. They've just had their energy sapped. And it's like such an effective, controlled breakdown of someone. And I could see the art form there of like how skillful that is and how effective it is.
If you doubt it, or you don't really get it, but you enjoy UFC, but then you got to boo every time it hits the floor, go to one class and you'll kind of get an understanding of what's going on now when you watch it. Like, all right, there's actually a lot going on here once it hits the floor. Look, I love to see somebody just get knocked out on the feet. Everybody does. It's not, but I can also appreciate like the way somebody can move around someone and manipulate them and just keep weight in certain areas. Stuff like that's masterful grappling, even though it looks like not a lot's going on.
Tell me about that point, like when you were 20 then. What was it that made you want to go down to a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu gym and take that? What was BJJ the first kind of martial art you did?
It was the best mistake I've ever made, because obviously I wouldn't have had my club now and I'd have my working boots on, still labouring on a building site somewhere. But I thought it was a Thai boxing club, and I walked in there and then I was just getting grappled all over. I thought, what's going on here? And I was on the foot then. It was like, no, it was actually an MMA club, but I thought I'd walked into the Thai boxing class. I hadn't walked into the Brazilian Jiu Jitsu class. So then when I'm on the floor and I think the very first lesson I can remember, I learned a Kimura, which is like putting someone's arm up the back. And then I had a roll and I was instantly hooked. It was something I was always kind of the rough kid in school. I'd be wrestling about in the mud and that. I didn't care about, I wouldn't be standing there posing in school. I'd be just that kid that was just playing around in the mud and wrestling and what have you. That's kind of what I've done. And it was a complete mistake. I'd never watched the UFC. I wasn't a fan of the UFC. I was a boxing fan. And I just thought, I want to lose some weight. I want to learn to look after myself a little bit. I'll go down to that, join a Thai boxing club and go and do a bit of that. And then next time I was getting strangled. Thought, I'm going to learn this. This is mega. It was right, instinctively, like right up my street, something that I'd loved from day one, even though I got my ass kicked.
That's surprising that you were a boxing fan first. Who did you like back in the day then? Who did you watch?
Obviously, I'm a Mank. It was Hatton, and I kind of grew up in that era. Right, and my cousin was a boxer as well, Andy Aspinall. He was, so I'd watch him. Even Michael Jennings, Thomas McDonough, all kind of, Manchester's got a really good boxing kind of fraternity, So they're kind of the guys that I grew up watching. Then obviously the big names, your Lennox Lewis's and Tyson's and stuff. But yeah, I would not have entertained any kind of watching UFC grappling. I'd have been exactly the same as everyone else. It would have bored the life out of me. My thing was I enjoyed boxing, but like I say, it was a happy accident. It really was.
You speak very highly of practicing BJJ, and you've spoken a lot about the benefits. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on some of the downsides, because you told me a little bit about a TBI or a brain injury you sustained. Was that through training? And what's the likelihood of sustaining an injury like that?
Firstly, the likelihood of sustaining injury in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is very, very low. You've got, obviously, I'm here, I can see everybody on my mats. People who get hurt generally are two new lads together. They don't really know when to stop. They don't understand when someone's pushing someone and maybe the leg's behind them. So my job as an instructor is to kind of, if I see two new lads stand up, say, and start wrestling to the ground, I'll shout over, just go to the ground, It's like, oh, it's silly, they might look at it like it's a bit silly starting on the ground or whatever, but the risk of being injured is quite high when you both try to ragdoll each other on your feet. Someone who falls a little bit on your arms, or you haven't learned how to fall yet, you don't know how to wrestle. So you do things on the ground, and obviously there's a lot of trust involved. If you've got my arm, I have to trust that you're going to apply. You're going to get to, we'll go at 100%, but then when my arm is fully locked out, I have to trust that you slow down, and give me time to tap. I've had this place now coming up to 9 years. I don't think, off the top of my head, we've had a serious injury, meaning somebody's had their arm broken here or something like that. It's kind of, people go to a certain point and then they stop. Even if I've got somebody's arm there not tapping, I won't carry on applying it. I'll just go. I'll let go and I go, look, I got you. Maybe their ego don't want them tap or they don't understand the website, mate, I've got you, and I'll just let go. But that disappears quickly. My TBI was actually from outside. It was on a night out. I was side punched when I was drunk. I fell and banged my head on a curb. So, really lucky to be just coming out of it with a TBI. I know, I don't know personally, but I know of a lot of people that have died in very similar situations. We've got post-concussion syndrome, BVVP, but it stands for something, but now I'm going to try and pronounce that. It's basically vertigo, positional vertigo. First month, couldn't really walk properly. Couldn't really get out of bed, couldn't really do much. So they were worrying times. As soon as I stood up, I just literally had to sit back down. But gradually, I've got myself back into training. I'm still not 100%. I have bad days, but they're getting further and further apart. Like I say, it's something that is worth mentioning for other people who might have suffered, TBIs. I'm on a lot of pages and groups and stuff, and especially when it's new. I found a lot of comfort in hearing people that were further down the road, a couple of years down the road. When I was in that first month, thinking, wow, I can't get out of bed, and obviously being somebody who's active and enjoys looking after himself. And this is my business as well. My business will go down the pan a lot. But gradually over time, it has got better. I still can't quite train to that 100%. I have to kind of know when to sit out. It's not so much that I can't physically do it. It's my recovery. It takes 3-4 days for me to recover. I get a bit nauseous and, just don't feel too good tomorrow if I go and say, try and do my 1 rep max on a bench or something like that, put a little bit of pressure on my head.
It must feel quite debilitating when it's something that you're really good at that you suddenly can't do or have to limit yourself from doing. It must really knock your confidence for a bit. How did you work through that? Did you have to be quite deliberate in the way that maybe you slowly reintroduce yourself to your training?
Yeah, I made the silly mistake of pretty much as soon as I was back on my feet, went back into training, kind of hit it, just like a normal session, because I could get up and walk about and do the normal things, but right back to training. I couldn't get out of bed for about a week after that. Just again, it really put my head back, just going and training hard. So then I kind of learned, ease myself back into things, and then slowly started getting back into teaching first. So I'm actually moving around, but I'm not sparring with anybody. And then just over time started, introducing rolling back. It's quite few and far between now where if I train really hard, like I said, I was training with Tom Aspinall for not his last fight, is the fight before against Curtis Blades, and they just had heavyweights in the room, and his dad was running the sessions. I think after about 3 sessions, I had to message Andy and say, look, it was a big hit to the ego, but I said it's taking me 3 days to recover.
Could you talk to me then about the some of the mental health benefits you've seen from maybe the students you've seen, or perhaps from your own experience, the mental health benefits of practicing a martial art?
Everyone says that healthy lifestyle, which it is, but it's not just in the doing of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu that makes me have a healthy lifestyle. To get better at Jiu Jitsu, I need to be fit, I need to be strong. So I also go and I'll lift weights, and I'll make sure I'm physically active. In Jiu-Jitsu, specifically, the clothes that I wear are quite tight-fitting. I mean, I've got a bit of weight on me, but, I notice it. You can't really hide from it. So you're like, all right, I better sort my diet out a little bit. You can't kind of hide it behind things. So it kind of just makes you make a little bit better choices all day rather than just, the hour that you're training. When you're rolling, there really is there. You are not distracted by anything. And I mean anything. I'm only thinking about what you're trying to do to me and what I'm trying to do to you. So if you think about a 1 hour segment in your day where you think about absolutely nothing other than what's right in front of you, is very rare. We're constantly distracted and constantly worrying about things, with job and, just every shit thing that everyone's minded about all day. it just disappears. And I think something, especially with men, again, I suppose it's the same for women, but for men, it feels like something that we should do. If that, it's like we should be able to go somewhere and kind of release some of that energy a little bit and go around and have a grapple and test ourselves physically. With any martial art, but Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is no exception. And also the camaraderie I put up a video the other day of 30 lads after it, all full of sweat. They've all been trying to strangle each other for an hour, all hugging, embracing each other. They're laughing, they're joking. You're always quite silly after a jiu-jitsu session. You've done the serious stuff. There's no more kind of bravado or anything like that. It's kind of gone. You're all very, very much yourself after it. You're silly. You've just been choked. I've just had someone sweat on my face and my sweat on his face. There's no more kind of standoffishness and try to protect yourself or hide who you are behind daft conversation or banter. You're very true and you're normally very silly. There's more laughs in here after a session than what there is when you go and stand in a pub with a group of lads. Honestly, it's just everyone's just after it laughing, joking, and I think that mental health side of it, just camaraderie and brotherhood. And people say it's very good to talk, which it is. They have a lot of clubs now where people go and they sit down and they talk. But it's more important to build real bonds with people. You tell me your problems, I tell you mine. Maybe that does create a bond, but not quite the bond of, just from my own experience, what happens when you've just shared a mat with each other for an hour every night over months. You grow a real close bond. And I think that's, some of that a lot of men over the age of 25 don't do anymore. You make all your mates in high school and then he starts ticking them off the list, like falling out of him because he's got married, he's moved there, you just see less and less people. So that's one of the main things for me is the camaraderie and the friendships, what you get out of jiu-jitsu and really being yourself.
There's a poster on the wall behind me. I think you can see it there. I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Fight Club. It's one of my favorite films.
I'm ashamed to say I've not watched it. It's one of them films that I do want to watch, but I've never watched it.
I think you'd like it, man, because it's essentially about the struggle in society, specifically for men. But again, as you say, I'm sure women will encounter a version of this as well. The way we work and the way we live our lives now, it's very sedentary. We're spending time sitting at desks. Back in the day, well, when we were cavemen, we'd be running around chasing our prey, our lunch or whatever, right? There's this kind of primal side to us that doesn't get used, and when you don't use a part of your brain that's there, you kind of feel unsatisfied or dissatisfied with your life for some reason. You can't quite nail it. So I think having a kind of controlled environment to engage in some sort of combat or as you're doing martial arts with your friends. Obviously in the film, they take it to the extreme. They just have these underground street fights. All these people from offices and whatever meet up and just vent out their frustrations. And they end up building this kind of camaraderie in this little club out of that. This is what happens when you try and suppress something that's a part of who we are. And it's much better to have a way to release that rather than, letting it build up until you have mental health problems and all sorts of other things, or you end up doing something totally out of character or making silly mistakes because you're not yourself.
For me, that's jiu-jitsu, and we say this so much. At home, your dad, I'm a husband, and at work, I was speaking to someone else the other day he owns a medium-sized business over there. He says, I see a lot of people, but I'm boss. So it's not the same. So I've got no real, I don't have real conversations with people. Yeah. I tell people what to do, where I go. And the boss, nobody's really open with me. And it's this, instead of walking here and some 19-year-old student just kicked my ass and then shook my hand and laughed me and joked me. And that's, there's not a barrier there. Nobody cares what does. We kind of get to know each other and we know what each other do and things like that. But nobody cares. The only hierarchy is the hierarchy of what happens on the match. You could be a millionaire, pauper, student. It doesn't matter. We've all got a lot in common because this is how we spend to spend our free time at the end of the day. There's got to be a lot of you that have some parties in common, no matter how different your lives look. When what you like to do is jump on a mat and practice strangling each other every night.
What's your thoughts on the current situation with MMA and crossover boxing? You've got Francis Ngannou going in and fighting Tyson Fury. You've got a whole heap of MMA fighters like Nate Diaz, Tyron Woodley, Anderson Silva jumping in there with the likes of Jake Paul. What do you think of this kind of stuff? Do you think it's good for MMA, good for boxing? What do you think?
People don't like to see Nate Diaz go and get beat up off people say YouTuber. I actually think he's a legit good boxer. But people don't like to see people at the tail end of their career go and get beat up off someone who's maybe in the prime or whatever. And they say, oh, it downplays MMA. Like, it doesn't. Listen, it only matters to the two people in the ring, and they're both getting paid. So who cares? There's not a person that'll turn down a £10 million, more money than they've ever earned in their entire career, right at the end of their career, to go and have a boxing match. Who's going to turn that down? Nobody. It's good, and it does bring more eyes to MMA. Even if you're completely pro boxing, you want Tyson Fury to absolutely kick Ngannou's ass, you're still going to be watching. You're still going to know who Ngannou is. Then you're going to watch people who's fighting, in MMA, and maybe that gets you interested in MMA.
Why do you think that guys who are known for their striking in MMA, when they cross over to boxing, look at when McGregor fought Mayweather. Obviously, Mayweather has the edge because he's arguably the greatest of all time. But why do you think he made it look so easy? Whenever these guys come across, Nate Diaz is known for pretty good striking in MMA, but it just doesn't really translate to boxing. Why do you think that is?
Again, it's striking, but it's striking in a totally different kind of realm. Khabib dropped, to go back to another, dropped Conor McGregor with a right hand or a left hand or whatever it was in an MMA fight. In a boxing fight, I think Khabib doesn't land a glove on Conor McGregor. But because Conor's so scared of the takedowns, he can fake a level change. He has to defend against the takedown, then the hands come in. It's a mix of styles. If you're focused entirely on boxing, but I'm worried about leg kicks, takedowns, my boxing is going to lack. That's just the top and bottom of it. A lot of people say this about a lot of guys, and then they're like, he's an elite boxer, whatever. And I'm like, no, he's absolutely not an elite boxer. He hasn't got enough time in the day. You'd need 3 lifetimes to be elite in MMA, elite boxing. You haven't got enough time in the day. MMA is its own discipline. Conor McGregor, for my money, would probably knock out Floyd Mayweather in an MMA fight because it's different. The boxing is different. The clinch is different. Elbows, different things come into it, what Mayweather would have to defend against. You can't just, cover and slip like this. He gets took down instantly. So he'd have to completely change his style, a style that he's worked on for 40 years or however old he is or whenever he started training, would go out the window because he'd have to change so much. And that's what's happening in boxing. It's like Ngannou with Fury. The reason it's a spectacle, and maybe he has got a puncher's chance, but in reality, he's got no chance. He's going to be absolutely butchered off Fury. But in MMA, Ngannou could very well knock Fury out because Fury would have to be worried about the takedowns. He'd have to defend a clinch. It's a totally different game. That then opens you up for strikes.
Interesting insight there, man. Again, I think you hit the nail on the head. You're guarding differently. Even the way you throw in MMA, there's a lot of big looping punches that come round a defense that a lot of the time isn't even there in MMA, because they're so busy thinking about what their feet are doing. Leg kicks, that's another thing. I remember when Conor adapted a sort of boxing style against Poirier in their second fight, and he just got his front leg just kicked off. He didn't seem to be doing anything about it. He was thinking so much about how his punches were going to land. He didn't seem to consider his legs for whatever reason. He seems to sort of want to get into boxing. He's calling out KSI of all people now. And I don't really get where he's going. I'd like to see him get back in with, the likes of a Chandler or maybe a Nate Diaz for the 3rd time. But I wonder, with his latest leg injury, do you think he's going to try and fully lean into this kind of boxing style that he had in the second Poirier fight? And do you think he'll even go back to MMA? What do you think he's going to do?
Again, it's probably going to follow the money. He's a money man. Imagine how much revenue a fight between him and that KSI or one of these other, big YouTuber boxer crossover names would carry. He earned big money in the UFC, but the Floyd Mayweather fight is the one that changed his life completely. Conor lives a very, very luxurious lifestyle now, does it? I'm not saying he doesn't. I'm not saying he won't, but I mean, is he as hungry as even some of these guys that are outside of the top 10 that are still being paid 10 grand a fight? And, think, if I get hold of Conor McGregor, I'm going to murder him. It's like they're hungry for it, whereas he's just like, where's my paycheck? What's the biggest money fight for me to make? I think Diaz makes sense because he's kind of at the tail end of his career. He's gone onto the boxing. He's got the money. And that stuff now, that kind of makes sense. I think kind of fighting somebody who's still really hungry and just all in on MMA is a bad decision for him to make. Make a 10 for the money and probably get beat up at this stage of his career.
Do you think he beats Chandler?
No. To be fair, though, I'm often wrong. So it's not like I'm really got some insight into it. I'm wrong more often than I'm right with these. Conor McGregor can lose that fight. He can still go and fight KSI tomorrow. He can still go and earn mega money. Like I said, just thinking about the mentality of it, he might be a totally different animal. I don't know. But most people are thinking, there's still 50 million on the table for me there. Win, lose, or draw. Whereas Chandler maybe thinks, maybe this is my last shot at getting some real money out of this. You know, the mindset's coming in a little different. And Chandler's a beast himself, you know, is a specimen and a very high level wrestler. So
the criticism that's leveled at a lot of these guys is your prize fighters at the end of the day. Of course, you should chase the money. But when guys like McGregor, or even in the world of boxing, Tyson Fury taking the Ngannou fight, when Anthony Joshua and Usyk, all these guys are right there. Okay, you can make more money outside of that, maybe. But at what point do you start thinking about cementing your legacy? You know, especially like a McGregor, who always seems so passionate about being the best, and then to sort of chase after these money fights.
Darren Till was a prime example of this. Somebody who had that belief, I am the best in the world, and he was beating everyone very convincingly. Then he lost at the elite level. I think he's lost like 7 since. I think people who really truly believe that they're great, once they maybe realise that they're not great, they're just very, very, very good, or maybe they're great but they're not elite, I think mentally that really hurts them, and they're just not quite in the game the same way as what they were when they thought they was absolutely invincible. Going over to the Tyson Fury thing, I mean, I can't criticise Ngannou for going and taking 10, 20 million, whatever he's going to get paid.
No.
You can criticise Fury when he's already worth, 150 million. And listen, we all contradict ourselves. I do it all the time. But he's, you know, a fighting man, only interested in fighting and not money. And then he's fighting Ngannou when these real challenges are out there for him, which, you know, people know outside of an absolute fluke, not a fluke, but, you know, a 1 in a million punch. Ngannou is going nowhere near Fury. He's going to get absolutely butchered. It'll last as long as Fury wants it to last before he puts him away. If you're just a fighting man interested in legacy and not money, then why not fight Usyk? Why not fight Joshua? Let's cement your legacy, which I think is one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. I think he's an unbelievable boxer, but there's still challenges out there.
Yeah, I think he's the best we've got at the moment, but he'll put his name up there with Muhammad Ali and Lennox Lewis, and it's like, you can't make that comparison when you haven't beat all the guys in your era, which is Usyk, Joshua. Okay, he's beaten Wilder, but you know, there's a few guys are out there that would pose him a good challenge, and arguably Usyk's got more belts than him. Is Usyk not the best of this era? You know, it's not. There's always going to be that conversation unless he just puts that to bed. I'd love to talk more about this, but we've not got much longer left, unfortunately. So I wanted to end on this. Could you give our listeners one reason, the best reason why you think they should join a martial arts gym today, next week?
Physically, you can go and have a jog in the park. You can go and do, you know, a million other things if you want to get physically fit. But I think the mental health side, the camaraderie, the friendships you're going to get out of it, and the lifelong perspective change that you're going to get out of doing martial arts. I know that's a few reasons, but I couldn't get just one.
No, that was pretty concise, man. Would you say that's the main thing you've got out of it from your journey?
100%. Lifelong friendships, real friendships. And again, just an altered perspective of the way I look at things. You know, it was very, very different to what I would if I'd never trained martial arts.
Well said, man. Yeah, that's all we've got time for today. Yeah, again, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.